wisdom involves intelligence beyond the merely personal. All of what I'm calling universal intelligence is different ways of moving beyond our personal perspective, intelligence, information, whatever. And nature and evolution have deeply embedded in them massive intelligence and information and solutions and wisdom. The in any given part of nature, either natural system or a particular organisms, particular kinds of organisms, or relationships between organisms, or the planet as a whole, these are all dimensions of nature. Nature is always evolving, and evolutionary solutions to the problems of life are embedded in the forms that nature takes and the processes that it goes through. So we can get beyond our personal and even species, human-centric ways of seeing things to the extent we open ourselves and investigate what nature has to tell us of what it has found as it has done its complex trial and error processes and system building processes and holistic processes. You know, everything is bound together, and that binding, that connection, that kind of diversity embodies is the kind of thing that we as supposedly separate entities need to learn from, absorb the wisdom of, and apply in our individual and collective lives. And there's a funny way in that that's similar to the knowledge bases represented by spiritual, philosophical, and ethical traditions. There's lots of differences between, for example, different religions or different philosophies, not battlings between them. But there's also a lot of common ground. There are universal understandings that come from mystics of all different traditions. There's universal understandings that come from the philosophical understandings, people who have thought deeply about what's going on in the world, what's the nature of reality. There's some really powerful understandings that can be gotten there, particularly when they're common threads. And ethical understandings, of course. I mean, there's a parallel between human ethics and evolutionary dynamics, because ethics have to do with relationship. And the sort of for example, the golden rule is a very fundamental principle that shows up in virtually every major spiritual tradition, religious tradition. And it's pretty obvious, you know, some form of it. It's like, if you are doing things to other people that you wouldn't want done to you, and that they don't like, the chances are it's not going to turn out well. And if you are doing things to other people that they like, that they value, that they enjoy, then things are probably going to turn out well, particularly if they are doing such things to you too. So it's sort of a, hello, this is so basic and obvious, but we don't do it. I know my father used to talk about having a golden rule foreign policy, you know, treat other countries the way we would like them to treat us. It's like, whoa, why don't you talk about foreign policy from a viewpoint of the golden rule? You see just how far we can wander from these basic things. So going back to those evolved among us human beings understandings, whether spiritual, philosophical, or ethical, there's a lot that can be said for the things that survive and that show up all over the place. The ideas that survive and that show up all over the place tend to have, they're surviving because they have some value to them, just as traits in organisms survive because they have some value to them. And the more of those that we can understand, the more deeply we can understand them, the more wisdom we can extract from them when we are consulting them on our decisions. And wisdom can come to us from transcending our limited awareness, which is, hey, me talking to you and listening to you, and you talking to me and listening to me. Right away, we are transcending our limited awareness, getting into systems thinking to see the larger things. You know, we don't see the kinds of relationships that happen. We don't directly perceive, I guess I should say, the kind of relationships that are going on in the biological, geological, and social systems. We don't necessarily see all that going on, but we can learn about them, and we can become aware and learn to perceive them, learn to discern more clearly what's going on in and around us, to be able to become aware, for example, internalized oppression, internalized racism, sexism, things like that, to know I have been brought up in a system that trains me to think and feel and respond in particular ways that are not necessarily functional. So what are those ways? To learn to transcend the limited dimensions of our awareness, all different kinds, deepening into our common humanity, and even into our common life, you know, to be able to realize that animals and probably even plants have levels of intelligence and feeling and responsiveness that we, you know, in our hyper materialist sensibility, we may not grant them, but if we really look, we find out. And more and more science is clarifying things that many more traditional societies have already assumed and experienced in their own interactions with the world. And of course, seeing each other, you know, that of God in every person, or we all come from a common ancestor, or I feel compassion when this happens to somebody I always thought of as an other, or just getting to know them. Very often people have prejudices because they don't know anybody like that. You know, they don't know a gay person, they don't know a black person, they don't know a rich person, whatever. They don't know who this other, and so they can put it in a box and treat that person as an it rather than as a being. So various ways of deepening into our common humanity is another. We're universalizing our intelligence when we do that. And of course, the meditative traditions talk, particularly mindfulness meditation, to witness how our personal consciousness links to the universal. The more we observe the dynamics of our own consciousness and the way those dynamics make us feel separate, the more we see that there's something underlying that feeling of separateness, which actually ties us or makes us realize we are an expression of something that is deeper and larger and broader than our individual personhood. That the individual personhood is to a certain extent a construct, just like race is a construct of a society. Personhood is a construct of both society and our biological and developmental dynamics, and that can be transcended by witnessing the dynamics that happen as they happen in meditative processes. So all of these are ways to expand our intelligence, or the realm within which our intelligence operates, beyond the merely personal into increasingly universal ways of experience and engagement. Golden rule should be added to my little list. I have deep ecology, which is a mix of ecological understandings and pagan or spiritual, nature spirituality, the sense of immersive consciousness in nature that can coexist, as it does in my daughter, with scientific understandings of what's going on in nature. And deep ecology is kind of that, has that integration. Quaker process, the sense of waiting on some larger intelligence, and if we are open to it, it will offer us insights, and particularly collectively, we can access this larger thing, and we all, like the blind man and the elephant, each of us, as we wait on guidance, we can get different guidances, but if we hear each other, we are hearing other dimensions of this larger thing, or that is an assumption you can have when you're going through that kind of process. And they do that, like when they do Quakers do their their business meetings. They talk about a meeting for worship for business. So it's not a business meeting, and it's not just a Quaker worship meeting. It is a meeting for worship for business. I like that combination. And the Collective Wisdom Initiative studies that kind of thing. You know, here's a bunch of people meditating together, and how do they access a larger thing than themselves, tune into it, and then realize that each one of them is tuning into that thing in a different way, and that there's a need to integrate those diverse perspectives. Once you've once you've listened to your different tunings, different stations on the radio, how do you put it all together? Something like that. It's interesting because I have often thought about the two different dimensions that can happen in a group process that's really good. And one of them has a tuning into things that are beyond the self, and the other has a synergy among diverse people and perspectives. And one is more sort of mechanistic and systems conscious. You want to make sure you have diverse people. And in the first approach, you want to make sure you have people who are really good at tuning in to, to mystical realities or collective consciousness or something. There are two very different approaches to group process. I have experienced the impacts of both of those, and I love to sort of try and sense how much of what is going on in this particular group. And the Happiness Hypothesis is a book which is an evolutionary study of human ethics systems. What kinds of guidance for behaviors are universal because they help people survive individually in social contexts or as communities and societies in larger contexts. So it's an evolutionary study of ethics, which is a very interesting approach. Earth Charter, of course, is here we all are here on the earth, and how should we behave to make sure that we're living in ways that are going to help us sustain our society and our lives. And of course, the Golden Rule. So those are all the methods that I associated with that.